Kevin, a bright and responsible 13-year-old, was heading home when he stumbled upon a lost wallet. Instead of keeping the money for himself, Kevin chose to return it to its owner, Mr. Whitley, a wealthy yet reclusive man known in the neighborhood. Despite feeling nervous about the encounter, Kevin's act of honesty set off a series of events that would change his life forever. The next day, a police officer appeared at Kevin's door, leading to an unexpected meeting with Mr. Whitley. This small but powerful act of integrity not only brought Kevin and Mr. Whitley together but also sparked a life-changing friendship and opportunity, reminding us all of the value of kindness and honesty. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. After a long day filled with the usual hustle of school and work, Kevin finally began his walk home, eager to unwind. As he meandered through the familiar streets, his mind drifted to thoughts of his upcoming school trip, something he had been looking forward to for weeks. But his thoughts were interrupted when he noticed something out of place on the sidewalk: a worn leather wallet, partially hidden beneath a pile of leaves. Kevin's curiosity piqued, and he bent down to pick it up. The wallet was heavy in his hand, and as he opened it, he saw a significant amount of cash inside, more than enough to cover the cost of his trip, and then some. For a moment, Kevin's heart raced as he considered keeping the money. It would be so easy to justify after all. The trip was educational, and his family wasn't exactly wealthy. The temptation was strong, but as he stood there, the lessons his mother had instilled in him since he was a child began to surface. Mrs. Johnson, a woman of unwavering principles, had always taught Kevin the importance of honesty and integrity. She often said, "Doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it." Kevin's conscience gnawed at him, making the wallet feel heavier with each passing second. He knew what he had to do. With a deep breath, he flipped through the wallet and found an ID card. The name on it read Mr. Whitley, and the address was listed as Oak Street. Kevin immediately recognized the name. Mr. Whitley was known around town as a reclusive, somewhat mysterious figure who lived alone in a large, old house that many kids avoided. Despite the fear that began to creep into his thoughts, Kevin decided to take the wallet back to its rightful owner. As he walked toward Oak Street, he felt a mixture of dread and determination. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows that made the journey feel even more daunting. When he finally reached Mr. Whitley's house, Kevin paused at the gate. The house was just as he remembered it: large, weathered, with overgrown bushes and peeling paint that added to its ominous aura. Kevin swallowed hard, his hand trembling slightly as he pushed open the creaky gate and walked up the path. Each step felt like it took an eternity, and by the time he reached the front door, his heart was pounding in his chest. He stood there for a moment, gathering his courage before raising his hand and knocking firmly. The sound echoed in the still evening air, and after what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open. Kevin's breath caught in his throat as he came face to face with Mr. Whitley. The man was tall, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through him, and a stern expression that made Kevin feel as though he had done something wrong. But there was no turning back now. With a shaky hand, Kevin held out the wallet, explaining in a quiet voice how he had found it on the sidewalk. Mr. Whitley's eyes narrowed as he took the wallet, his expression unreadable as he inspected its contents. For a moment, Kevin feared the worst, that Mr. Whitley would accuse him of stealing. But then, something unexpected happened. The man's stern gaze softened just a little, and he nodded at Kevin, offering a gruff, "Thank you, son." Kevin felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had done the right thing, and despite the intimidating encounter, he knew it was worth it. As he turned to leave, he noticed something in Mr. Whitley's eyes: a flicker of appreciation, perhaps even a hint of gratitude. Walking away from the house, Kevin couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The decision to return the wallet had been difficult, but now he knew it was the only choice he could have made. As he hurried home, Eager to tell his mother about what had happened, Kevin realized that this small act of honesty had not only reaffirmed his values but could also inspire others. Maybe, just maybe, he had made a difference in Mr. Whitley's life too. When Kevin finally burst through the front door of his home, he was brimming with excitement. "Mom, you won't believe what happened today," he called out, his voice filled with the warmth and satisfaction that only comes from doing what's right, no matter how challenging it might be. Mrs. Johnson emerged from the kitchen, a dish towel in hand, smiling warmly at her son. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a golden glow across the cozy living room. She could tell by the way Kevin's eyes sparkled that he had something important to share. "What is it, sweetie?" she asked, her voice full of affection and curiosity. Kevin could hardly contain his excitement as he prepared to tell his mother about the day's events. His heart swelled with pride, knowing how much it would mean to her. He had found Mr. Whitley's wallet earlier that day, and the decision to return it, though tempting to keep given their modest means, had come naturally to him. It wasn't just about the wallet, it was about doing what was right, about living up to the values his mother had instilled in him from a young age. Kevin knew that making his mom proud was more important to him than anything else in the world. They moved to the living room, sinking into the familiar comfort of the worn-out couch, where they had shared countless conversations over the years. As Kevin recounted the entire experience, Mrs. Johnson listened intently, her gaze never leaving his face. The pride in her eyes was unmistakable, and as Kevin spoke, she felt a lump form in her throat, her eyes misting with emotion. When he finished his story, Mrs. Johnson gently reached out and squeezed his hand, her voice filled with warmth and admiration. "Oh, Kevin," she said softly, "I'm so incredibly proud of you. You made the right choice, even when it wasn't easy. That shows real courage and integrity." Kevin's throat tightened with emotion, and he could feel the beginnings of tears in his eyes. "Really," he whispered, needing to hear the words again to fully believe them. "Really," Mrs. Johnson replied, pulling him into a tight embrace. "Honesty and kindness are worth more than any amount of money. You've shown that today." Kevin nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of her words. He knew how hard his mother worked to provide for them, and how she never compromised her values, even when times were tough. It was her unwavering example that had guided him when he found himself facing a moment of temptation. His mother's quiet strength and integrity had been his compass, and he was grateful to have such a role model in his life. The next morning, Kevin walked to school, the crisp autumn air making his cheeks tingle and his breath visible in the cool morning light. As he kicked through the fallen leaves, he couldn't help but think about Mr. Whitley and whether the elderly man had noticed the wallet was missing before Kevin returned it. A small part of him hoped for another acknowledgement, perhaps a simple thank you, but Kevin quickly pushed the thought aside. He had done the right thing, and that knowledge was enough for him. He reminded himself that true integrity didn't seek rewards, it was its reward. The school day passed in a blur, with Kevin's mind occasionally drifting to the grand yet lonely house where Mr. Whitley lived. He wondered what it must be like to live in such a big place all alone. After school, Kevin hurried to his part-time job at the local newspaper company. As he sorted and delivered papers, his thoughts kept returning to Mr. Whitley. Did the old man read the local news? Kevin imagined him sitting in a leather armchair, the newspaper spread out before him, and wondered if someday his name might appear in the pages, perhaps for something noteworthy. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. But Kevin knew he couldn't let his imagination run away with him. He had responsibilities to focus on, like saving up for the school trip and helping out at home. His encounter with Mr. Whitley had been interesting, even a little mysterious, but life had to go on. Kevin stayed focused on his work, knowing how important it was to contribute to his family's needs and make sure they were taken care of. Later that afternoon, as Kevin wrapped up his shift and made his way home, he was greeted by an unexpected sight. There was a knock at the door just as he was approaching the house. Mrs. Johnson answered it, and to her surprise, she found a police officer standing on the porch. Her heart skipped a beat as concern flashed across her face, wondering what could have possibly happened. The officer introduced himself and, stepping aside, revealed Mr. Whitley standing just behind him, looking both uncomfortable and determined. Kevin, now standing at the gate, felt a mix of curiosity and confusion. He quickly made his way up the steps, his mind racing. What could this be about? Had he done something wrong without realizing it? As he greeted Mr. Whitley, he could sense that this was going to be a conversation he hadn't anticipated, and he braced himself for whatever was to come next. Mr. Whitley cleared his throat, his voice a bit shaky as he began to speak. "Kevin, I wanted to thank you properly for returning my wallet, but I soon realized that I didn't even know where you lived. It bothered me that I might never have the chance to express my gratitude for what you did." His eyes, filled with sincerity, met Kevin's as Officer Rivera, standing beside him, added, "Mr. Whitley came to us for help in finding you. He was determined to locate the person who had shown such honesty." Mrs. Johnson, who had been silently listening, gently placed a comforting hand on Kevin's shoulder, her face softening with admiration. "That's very thoughtful of you, Mr. Whitley," she said warmly. Smiling, Mr. Whitley continued, "Kevin, I want you to know that your honesty meant more to me than you could imagine. That wallet didn't just contain money, it held cherished memories of my late wife, reminders of a life we shared. When you returned it, you did more than just a good deed, you preserved a piece of my heart. Your kindness touched me deeply." Kevin, who had initially thought his action was just a simple return of a lost item, now felt the weight of Mr. Whitley's words. He hadn't realized how significant the wallet was or how much it meant to its owner. "I've lived in this community for years, but I've always kept to myself," Mr. Whitley continued, his voice softening as he reflected. "Your act of kindness reminded me of the goodness that still exists in people, especially in our youth. You renewed my faith in this community." Mrs. Johnson, sensing the emotion welling up in Kevin, gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze, pride shining in her eyes. Kevin, feeling a lump forming in his throat, tried to downplay his actions. "I just did what anyone would," he said humbly, his voice barely above a whisper. But Mr. Whitley gently shook his head, his expression serious yet tender. "No, Kevin, what you did was truly special. In today's world, it's rare to find someone with such integrity, and I wanted to make sure you knew how much it meant to me." Taking a deep breath, Mr. Whitley then announced, his voice filled with emotion, "I've been thinking about how I could repay your kindness, and I've come to a decision. I'd like to establish a full scholarship fund for you, Kevin, one that will cover your education through college." The room fell silent as the weight of Mr. Whitley's words sank in. Kevin and Mrs. Johnson were momentarily speechless, their eyes wide with shock. Kevin could feel tears welling up, and he whispered, "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Whitley." Mr. Whitley smiled gently, his eyes kind. "You've already thanked me, Kevin. Your honesty has renewed my faith in humanity, and this scholarship is my way of ensuring you have the bright future you deserve. I believe in you and I want to support you in every way I can." Overcome with emotion, Mrs. Johnson finally found her voice, expressing their deep gratitude with tears in her eyes. She knew how much Kevin had dreamed of going to college, and now, thanks to Mr. Whitley, that dream was within reach. Kevin, wiping away his tears, looked at Mr. Whitley with a newfound sense of determination. "I promise, I won't let you down. I'll work hard and make the most of this opportunity." As the news of the scholarship spread throughout the community, Kevin's life began to change. His teachers, classmates, and even people he barely knew started congratulating him on his integrity and the remarkable reward it had brought. In the school hallways, students stopped him to offer their congratulations, and some even asked for his autograph, a gesture that left Kevin both amused and a little embarrassed. "You're like a local celebrity now," his friend Tom teased during lunch, nudging him playfully. Despite the sudden attention, Kevin remained grounded, focusing on his studies with a new sense of purpose. After school, he continued working his part-time job at the local newspaper, where his boss, Mr. Johnson, praised him for his hard work and dedication. Kevin, however, stayed humble, insisting that he was just doing his best, not for recognition but because he believed in the value of hard work. As weeks turned into months, Kevin began visiting Mr. Whitley's house regularly. What started as simple visits soon turned into meaningful interactions. They would tackle household chores together, and in between Mr. Whitley, who had once been reclusive and withdrawn, began to open up. He shared stories from his past, tales of love, loss, and lessons learned, which deeply resonated with Kevin. The young man found himself inspired by Mr. Whitley's words of wisdom and encouragement, realizing that he had gained more than just financial support. He had found a mentor, a friend, and someone who believed in him wholeheartedly. Through these visits, Kevin learned that life's most valuable lessons often come from unexpected places, and that sometimes the simplest acts of kindness can have the most profound impact. One warm afternoon, as the golden rays of the sun filtered through the curtains, Mr. Whitley and Kevin sat together in the cozy living room, sifting through a box of old, faded photographs. The room was filled with the soft hum of nostalgia as Mr. Whitley began to share cherished memories of his late wife, Elizabeth, recounting their life together with a bittersweet smile. He lovingly showed Kevin pictures of their family, pointing out moments frozen in time: holidays, birthdays, and simple, joyful days spent together. As he spoke, there was a longing in his voice, a quiet ache that hinted at the profound loneliness he felt with his children and grandchildren living overseas, far from the home that once echoed with laughter and love. Kevin, who had come to admire Mr. Whitley deeply, felt a tug at his heartstrings as he listened. The weight of Mr. Whitley's loss seemed almost palpable, hanging in the air between them. Kevin reached out, placing a gentle hand on the old man's shoulder, offering silent comfort. In that moment, the connection between them deepened, transcending the roles of benefactor and recipient, bridging the gap between generations. Mr. Whitley looked up at Kevin, his weathered face softened by emotion, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "These visits mean more to me than you could ever know," Kevin, he said, his voice thick with gratitude. "You've brought life back into this old house. It's been so quiet without Elizabeth and the family, but now, with you here, it feels alive again." Kevin's heart swelled with a newfound respect for Mr. Whitley. He suddenly saw him in a different light, not just as the kind and generous man who had given him a scholarship, but as a friend, a mentor, and a figure of immense wisdom and quiet strength. "I'm glad I can be here for you," Kevin replied sincerely, his voice filled with warmth and sincerity. A gentle smile spread across Mr. Whitley's face as he patted Kevin's hand. "You remind me so much of my grandson," he said, a hint of wistfulness in his tone. "Having you around makes this house feel like home again, like it used to when it was filled with family." As the days turned into weeks, Kevin found himself spending more and more time at Mr. Whitley's house. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. Together they tackled the overgrown garden that had been neglected for too long, transforming it into a vibrant oasis of color and life. Kevin's hands, once smooth, became calloused from the hard work, but the pride he felt in their shared efforts far outweighed any discomfort. The garden flourished under their care, much like their friendship. One afternoon, as they worked side by side, the warm sun shining down on them, Mr. Whitley paused to admire their handiwork. "There's something special about watching things grow," he mused, his gaze distant as if lost in thought. "It teaches patience and care, and reminds us that the best things in life often take time." Kevin nodded in agreement, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. "I never thought I'd enjoy gardening so much," he admitted, surprised by how much he had come to love the simple, grounding task. Mr. Whitley chuckled softly, a sound that carried the wisdom of years. "Life's funny that way," he said. "Sometimes the things we least expect bring us the most joy. It's in these small, everyday moments that we find true happiness." Through these simple tasks, Kevin realized he was learning far more than any textbook could ever teach him. The time spent with Mr. Whitley was rich with lessons in life, patience, and the quiet contentment that comes from nurturing something to life. One day, as they finished their work in the garden, Mr. Whitley shared a piece of wisdom that had been passed down to him: the best fertilizer is the gardener's shadow. Kevin thought about the saying, turning it over in his mind. "Like how you're teaching me just by letting me help?" he asked, a thoughtful expression on his face. Mr. Whitley smiled, a twinkle in his eye. "Exactly," he said. "And you're teaching me too, Kevin, reminding me of the joy in simple things, of the beauty in the everyday." As Kevin walked home that evening, a sense of fulfillment washed over him. Helping Mr. Whitley had become more than just a good deed. It had become a source of genuine happiness, a purpose that brought him joy. Over time, Kevin noticed a change in Mr. Whitley too. The old man stood taller, his step lighter, his eyes brighter with the spark of life that had been reignited. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 2 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. One crisp Saturday morning, Kevin arrived at the house to find Mr. Whitley dressed smartly, a rare sight that piqued his curiosity. "Kevin," Mr. Whitley said, a smile lighting up his face, "I thought we might do something different today." Kevin's curiosity grew, and he found himself intrigued. "Sure, Mr. Whitley," he replied eagerly. "What did you have in mind?" Mr. Whitley's smile widened as he nodded, and Kevin knew that whatever lay ahead, it would be another chapter in their growing friendship, a bond that had brought life, joy, and a sense of belonging back into both their lives. "Well," Mr. Whitley said, his eyes sparkling with a newfound energy, "I heard there's a community fair at the park today. I thought it might be fun to check it out together." This sudden enthusiasm caught Kevin off guard. Mr. Whitley had always been somewhat of a recluse, never showing much interest in local events or mingling with the neighbors. Kevin couldn't hide his surprise but quickly responded with genuine excitement. "That sounds fantastic, Mr. Whitley. I'd love to go with you." As they strolled through the neighborhood towards the park, Kevin noticed something different about Mr. Whitley. The elderly man, usually reserved and quiet, was greeting people they passed with a warm smile, even striking up conversations with neighbors he had previously ignored. It was as if a new side of Mr. Whitley had emerged, one that Kevin had never seen before. The change was subtle but significant, and it made Kevin feel like they were both embarking on a new adventure. When they arrived at the fair, Mr. Whitley's curiosity was palpable. He wandered from booth to booth, asking questions and engaging with the organizers and vendors as if he were discovering a hidden gem in the town he had lived in for so long. "You know, Kevin," Mr. Whitley said, pausing to watch a group of children play a game, "I've lived here for decades, but it feels like I'm seeing this town with fresh eyes for the first time. It's like I'm finally waking up to the life that's been happening all around me." In the days and weeks that followed, Mr. Whitley's transformation only deepened. He began attending town meetings, something he had never done before, and his presence at community events became a regular occurrence. He even started making donations to local charities and offering his time to volunteer at the community center. One afternoon, as he and Kevin were working side by side in the garden, Mr. Whitley looked up from the soil and said thoughtfully, "It's high time I gave something back to this town. I've taken so much from it over the years, but now I see how much it has to offer in return." Their relationship, which had initially been centered around chores and errands, blossomed into something much more profound. Mr. Whitley began to open up to Kevin, sharing stories about his life that he had kept to himself for years. He spoke fondly of his family, especially his grandson Thomas, who lived far away and couldn't visit as often as Mr. Whitley would have liked. As they spent more time together, it became clear that Kevin was filling a void in Mr. Whitley's life, offering companionship and warmth that his distant family could not. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Mr. Whitley turned to Kevin with a smile that was both tender and filled with unspoken emotion. "You remind me so much of Thomas," he said, his voice thick with affection. "You've become like a grandson to me." Kevin felt a wave of emotion wash over him, his throat tightening with the weight of Mr. Whitley's words. "And you've become like a grandfather to me," he replied softly, his voice barely above a whisper. From that moment on, their bond grew even stronger. They shared more personal stories, with Kevin eagerly soaking up the wisdom that Mr. Whitley imparted during their conversations. For Kevin, who was juggling the demands of school, work, and his visits to Mr. Whitley, these moments were a source of comfort and grounding. Despite his busy schedule, he found himself looking forward to their time together, cherishing the connection they had built. At his part-time job at the local newspaper, Kevin's dedication and reliability did not go unnoticed. His co-workers admired his work ethic, and his supervisor often praised him for his commitment to the job. Kevin took pride in knowing that his hard work was not only helping him achieve his academic and career goals, but also allowing him to contribute to his family's well-being. Yet, no matter how hectic his day was, Kevin always made time for Mr. Whitley. After his shifts at the newspaper, Kevin would head straight to Mr. Whitley's house, still carrying his backpack filled with books and papers. Mr. Whitley would always greet him with a warm smile, eager to hear about Kevin's day. Their conversations were filled with laughter and mutual respect, with Kevin often sharing anecdotes from work while Mr. Whitley listened intently, occasionally interjecting with his own experiences from the past. It was during these moments that Kevin realized just how much he valued Mr. Whitley's presence in his life. In addition to their conversations, Kevin continued to help Mr. Whitley with various tasks around the house. Whether it was tending to the garden, fixing a leaky faucet, or simply sitting quietly while doing homework as Mr. Whitley read a book, their time together was a comforting routine. Kevin's teachers began to notice his consistent effort in class, and his grades reflected his hard work. Despite the challenges of balancing his responsibilities, Kevin managed to excel in his studies, driven by a sense of purpose that extended beyond his academic achievements. As weeks turned into months, Kevin's visits to Mr. Whitley became the highlight of his week. He found himself eagerly anticipating the stories and lessons that Mr. Whitley would share, each one a treasure trove of wisdom and life experience. One particularly sunny afternoon, as they relaxed on the porch, Mr. Whitley broke the silence with a heartfelt reflection. "I'm so glad you found my wallet that day, Kevin," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "It brought me more than just my money, it brought me you." Kevin felt his heart swell with emotion. "I'm glad too, Mr. Whitley," he replied, his voice choked with feeling. "I never imagined that returning a wallet could lead to something so meaningful." Mr. Whitley reached out and patted Kevin's hand, his eyes shining with gratitude. "This friendship we've built," he said softly, "is worth more than any amount of money or scholarship." At that moment, Kevin realized that while the scholarship was important, it wasn't the most valuable thing he had gained. "You're right," he whispered, his voice filled with emotion. "I've learned so much from you about life, kindness, and what truly matters." Mr. Whitley's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he looked at Kevin, his voice trembling with emotion. "You've reminded this old man of something he thought he'd lost forever, the feeling of hope and the ability to see the world with fresh, youthful eyes." They sat together side by side as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The silence between them was not just comfortable, it was deeply fulfilling. Kevin felt a profound sense of contentment wash over him. In Mr. Whitley, he had found far more than just a benefactor. He had discovered a true friend and mentor. The stories they exchanged, the lessons imparted, and the deep connection they forged, these were the treasures Kevin would carry with him always. As the warm days of summer gradually gave way to the crisp air of autumn, Kevin received news that would change the course of his life forever. He had been accepted into Oakwood High School, thanks to a scholarship provided by Mr. Whitley. The moment was surreal as he held the acceptance letter in his trembling hands, his breath catching in his throat. I got in," he whispered, his voice barely audible as he stared at the paper in disbelief. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 3 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. His mother, Mrs. Johnson, couldn't contain her joy. She pulled Kevin into a tight embrace, tears streaming down her face as she kissed the top of his head. "Oh, Kevin, I'm so proud of you," she exclaimed, her voice choked with emotion. The pride and love in her eyes were evident, and Kevin felt a warmth in his heart that only a mother's love could provide. Unable to contain his excitement, Kevin dashed over to Mr. Whitley's house, clutching the acceptance letter like a prized possession. He practically burst through the door, waving the letter in the air as he called out for Mr. Whitley. The elderly man, always quick with a smile, greeted him warmly and ushered him inside. They settled into their usual spots, and as Kevin began to share the incredible news, he was surprised to find his initial excitement gradually giving way to a gnawing sense of anxiety. What if he didn't fit in at Oakwood High? The prestigious school seemed like a world apart from everything he had known. Mr. Whitley, perceptive as ever, noticed the change in Kevin's demeanor. He placed a reassuring hand on the young boy's shoulder and spoke softly but firmly. "Kevin, you earned this. Your hard work, your integrity, and your good character got you here. You belong at Oakwood High just as much as anyone else, and I'll be here to support you every step of the way." Those words, spoken with such conviction, melted Kevin's fears away, leaving him with a renewed sense of confidence about the challenges that lay ahead. The first day at Oakwood High was a whirlwind of emotions for Kevin. He stood at the entrance of the grand building, his heart pounding in his chest as he took in the scene before him. The other students, dressed in their crisp uniforms, walked with an air of confidence that made Kevin feel both excited and nervous. He tugged at the stiff collar of his new uniform, feeling slightly out of place among his peers. Despite the butterflies in his stomach, he reminded himself that he wasn't alone in this journey. His mother's unwavering support and Mr. Whitley's wise counsel were with him, bolstering his courage. As Kevin entered his first advanced literature class, he was immediately struck by the vast difference between this and his previous school. The other students were discussing books and authors he had never even heard of, their conversations filled with references that made him feel out of his depth. The coursework was intense, and Kevin found himself struggling to keep up. His nights grew longer as he pored over textbooks and worked tirelessly on assignments, determined not to fall behind. Lunchtimes were the hardest. He often found himself sitting alone, watching as his classmates talked animatedly about vacations in far-off places and weekends at exclusive country clubs. The sense of being an outsider weighed heavily on him. But in those moments of doubt, Kevin recalled Mr. Whitley's encouraging words. He pushed himself to work harder, spending extra hours in the library, seeking out teachers for help, and immersing himself in the world of literature that had once seemed so foreign to him. He refused to let the challenges defeat him. Weekends became Kevin's sanctuary. He would visit Mr. Whitley's home, where the old man's wisdom and stories provided a much-needed respite from the pressures of school. They would sit in the cozy living room, sipping tea as Mr. Whitley shared tales of his youth, peppered with lessons about life, perseverance, and staying true to one's values. "Don't lose sight of who you are," Kevin, Mr. Whitley would say. "You don't need to be like everyone else to succeed. Your uniqueness is your strength." These visits became Kevin's anchor, grounding him and giving him the strength to face the challenges of his new school life. As the weeks turned into months, Kevin slowly began to find his footing at Oakwood High. The small victories started to add up: a well-received essay, a particularly insightful comment in class, and a nod of approval from a teacher. One day, while sitting in the bustling cafeteria, Kevin noticed a new student sitting alone, looking just as lost and out of place as he had felt on his first day. Without hesitation, Kevin picked up his tray and walked over to the boy, offering a friendly smile. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. The boy looked up, surprised, but quickly nodded. This simple act of kindness didn't go unnoticed. Kevin's peers began to see him in a new light, admiring his willingness to reach out and his determination to succeed despite the odds. In his English class, Kevin was caught off guard when Sarah, one of the top students, approached him after class. "We're working on a group project, and we'd like you to join us," she said, her tone warm and inviting. "Your ideas in class are really interesting, and I think you'd be a great addition to our group." Kevin couldn't help but smile, his confidence growing with each positive interaction. He knew that his hard work was paying off, and it felt good to be recognized for his contributions. As the school year progressed, Kevin's bond with Mr. Whitley only grew stronger. Their weekly visits continued, each one filled with laughter, stories, and deep conversations. Mr. Whitley took great joy in watching Kevin grow, offering advice and encouragement at every turn. "You're doing well, Kevin," he would say. "But remember, it's not just about the grades or the accolades. It's about the person you're becoming." These words resonated deeply with Kevin, guiding him as he navigated the complex world of Oakwood High. But as the seasons changed, so did Mr. Whitley. The old man began to slow down, his once quick steps becoming more measured, his hands a little shakier than before. Kevin noticed the subtle changes and, in response, became more attentive. He started spending more time at Mr. Whitley's house, helping with chores, tending to the garden, and even cooking meals together. They found joy in the simple things: planting flowers, baking bread, and enjoying the quiet moments that life offered. Their friendship, once centered around lessons and stories, had evolved into a deep bond of mutual care and respect. For Kevin, these moments with Mr. Whitley were invaluable. He cherished the time they spent together, knowing that the old man's wisdom and joy had become an integral part of his life. In Mr. Whitley, Kevin had found not just a mentor, but a true friend, a relationship that would continue to shape his journey, both at Oakwood High and beyond. As spring gently unfolded its warmth, Mr. Whitley and Kevin found themselves standing by the overgrown and forgotten garden that once thrived under the loving care of Mr. Whitley's late wife. The garden, now tangled with weeds and neglect, had once been the crown jewel of their home, a place where she poured her heart and soul. Mr. Whitley's eyes, filled with a mist of nostalgia, lingered on the remnants of what used to be. "This was her pride and joy," he whispered, his voice heavy with the weight of fond memories and a deep sense of loss. Kevin, sensing the profound connection between Mr. Whitley and the garden, gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Why don't we bring it back to life together?" he suggested, his voice filled with quiet determination. The thought seemed to ignite a spark in Mr. Whitley's eyes, a flicker of hope amidst the sadness. With renewed purpose, they began spending their weekends in the garden, clearing away the invasive weeds and planting new life where the old had withered. As they worked side by side, their conversations flowed effortlessly, filled with stories of the past, dreams for the future, and the simple pleasures of the present. Week by week, the garden began to transform. The once barren patches of earth started to bloom with vibrant colors, mirroring the blossoming friendship between Mr. Whitley and Kevin. By the time summer arrived, the garden had become a breathtaking oasis of flowers and greenery, a testament to their hard work and growing bond. One day, as they stood admiring the garden's beauty, Kevin couldn't help but marvel at what they had achieved together. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with pride. Mr. Whitley, his heart swelling with gratitude, turned to Kevin with a smile that spoke of both pride and a deep appreciation for the companionship that had flourished alongside the garden. "Yes, we did it together," he replied, his voice soft but full of meaning. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 4 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. As the weeks rolled on, the bond between Kevin and Mr. Whitley deepened. They spent countless hours talking, their conversations evolving from casual banter to heartfelt exchanges. Kevin, who had once kept his fears and dreams to himself, began to open up, sharing his anxieties about school and his aspirations for the future. In return, Mr. Whitley offered wisdom drawn from a lifetime of experiences, imparting valuable lessons that Kevin took to heart. When Kevin managed to excel in a particularly challenging exam, he couldn't wait to share the news with Mr. Whitley, who celebrated his success with genuine pride, further solidifying the strong connection that had grown between them. Recognizing the positive impact Mr. Whitley had on her son, Mrs. Johnson decided to invite him to dinner one evening. The dinner was a joyous occasion, filled with laughter, delicious food, and warm conversation. This initial invitation soon became a regular event, with Mr. Whitley becoming an honorary member of the family. What had once been a lonely existence for Mr. Whitley began to fill with a sense of belonging and purpose. The friendship between Kevin and Mr. Whitley had evolved into something profound, a familial connection that transcended the boundaries of age and circumstance. It became a cornerstone of their lives, bringing warmth and companionship as the seasons changed. On a bright and lively day, Kevin and Mr. Whitley decided to visit the local park, where a fair was in full swing. The air was filled with the sweet aroma of cotton candy, the sound of laughter, and the vibrant energy of people enjoying themselves. They volunteered at one of the game booths, with Kevin enthusiastically running the ring toss while Mr. Whitley handed out prizes to the lucky winners. As they worked together, Kevin noticed the joy radiating from Mr. Whitley's face, a stark contrast to the reclusive man he had once known. After the fair, they made their way to Kevin's house, where Mrs. Johnson welcomed them with a warm smile and a delicious meal. The evening was filled with stories, laughter, and a deep sense of connection. The friendship between Kevin and Mr. Whitley had become something truly special, bridging the gap between generations and bringing joy to everyone involved. Years passed, and the bond between Kevin and Mr. Whitley only grew stronger. On the day of Kevin's graduation, Mr. Whitley arrived at the ceremony, his face beaming with pride. As Kevin walked across the stage to receive his diploma, he looked out into the crowd and saw Mr. Whitley and Mrs. Johnson, their expressions filled with pride and love. After the ceremony, they returned to Mr. Whitley's home, where the once neglected garden now stood as a flourishing symbol of their enduring relationship. As they sat together on the bench they had placed in the garden years ago, the sun setting in a blaze of colors, Mr. Whitley turned to Kevin, his eyes misting with emotion. "Kevin, my boy," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I'm incredibly proud of you." Kevin, feeling a lump form in his throat, smiled warmly at the man who had become like a father to him. "Thank you, Mr. Whitley," he replied softly. "I couldn't have done it without you." In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the garden they had nurtured together, they both knew that their bond was something truly special, a connection that would last a lifetime. Mr. Whitley gently shook his head, his eyes full of warmth and pride. "Kevin, it's not just about your academic achievements, although those are indeed impressive," he began, his voice soft yet filled with emotion. "What truly fills my heart with pride is the remarkable young man you've grown into, the kind, thoughtful, and compassionate person you are today." He paused for a moment, looking around at the vibrant garden they had cultivated together. "Like these flowers that have blossomed under our care, you too have flourished, facing every challenge with grace and always choosing to show kindness to others. You've brought so much joy into my life, Kevin, more than words can truly convey." Kevin felt his eyes well up with tears as Mr. Whitley continued, his voice steady but tender. "I remember the day you found my wallet," Mr. Whitley said, his gaze fixed on the memories of that pivotal moment. "You didn't just return the money, you gave me something far more valuable, a friendship that has enriched my life beyond anything I could have ever imagined." He looked directly into Kevin's eyes, his expression full of gratitude and affection. Kevin, overwhelmed with emotion, managed to reply, his voice thick with feeling, "Mr. Whitley, I can't even begin to express how much your support, your guidance, and your love have meant to me. You've been more than just a mentor, you've been a guiding light in my life." They stood there for a moment, surrounded by the beauty of the garden they had nurtured together, each lost in their thoughts. The colors of the flowers seemed even more vibrant, the air even more fragrant, as they reflected on the journey they had shared. Kevin broke the silence, his voice filled with sincerity and deep emotion. "I wouldn't be where I am today without you," he said. "You've taught me so much about life, about kindness, and about what it truly means to be a good person." Mr. Whitley smiled warmly, his eyes shining with unshed tears as he placed a gentle hand on Kevin's shoulder. "Shall we take a walk?" he suggested, his voice a little choked with emotion. Kevin nodded, and together they began to stroll through the garden, their steps slow and measured, savoring the moment. As they walked, Kevin turned to Mr. Whitley, his voice filled with determination and love. "No matter where life takes me, our bond will always remain strong," he said. "You're not just my mentor, you're family. You've always been there for me, and I want you to know that you'll always have a special place in my heart." Mr. Whitley's eyes glistened with tears as he nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "And you, my boy," he said softly, "are the grandson I never had. You filled a space in my life that I didn't even know was empty, and for that, I am eternally grateful." They continued their walk in comfortable silence, each lost in their thoughts but connected by the deep bond they shared. As they admired the vibrant, thriving garden around them, a living testament to their friendship and the time they had spent together, Kevin spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "This garden, it reminds me so much of our relationship," he said. "We started with something small, a lost wallet, a neglected patch of earth, and look at what we've grown together. Something beautiful, something lasting." Mr. Whitley chuckled softly, his heart swelling with joy. "Indeed, Kevin," he agreed. "And just like this garden, our friendship will continue to flourish, no matter the season, no matter the challenges we face. It will always be something we can look back on with pride and joy, knowing that we've created something truly special together." With that, they continued their walk, two souls connected by love, gratitude, and a shared sense of purpose, surrounded by the beauty of the garden that symbolized the richness of their bond. As we wrap up today's video, we've explored a powerful story of honesty, integrity, and the profound impact of doing the right thing. From Kevin's brave decision to return a lost wallet to the unexpected rewards that followed, we've seen how a small act of kindness can change lives in ways we might never anticipate. I'd love to hear from you. What has this story taught you? Please comment below with one thing you've learned and how you plan to bring it into practice in your own life. Your reflections and experiences can inspire others in our community. If you liked this video, please leave a comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more uplifting and inspirational content. If you're not subscribed yet, be sure to hit that subscribe button and activate the bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching and joining us on this journey of inspiration and personal growth. Until next time, stay kind and keep striving for goodness in all that you do.